Today's reading is from the book of Matthew, chapter 26, beginning in verse 36. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." This is the word of the Lord. And congregation says, "Praise be to God."
Well, good morning, and again, welcome to River Valley Church. Just a little bit about who we are. If you are newer to today, we are a church plant in formation, is what we like to say, and this happens to be our 7th Sunday together in this way. Be proud of yourselves. We've made it 7 weeks. It's so good. We get to rest today. That's right. We're so thankful to be here. My name is Justin. And I am just excited to be with you. We are in a series right now called Practicing the Way. And we have been looking at, over the past 7 weeks, how we are shaped and formed by the things in our life, the habits, the practices, the patterns, the rhythms. All of this is shaping you into a certain type of person. We looked this morning at a passage where Jesus is in agony. He's in pain. He is experiencing suffering. And you know what I found is that there's a lot of disagreement out there in the world today. Would you agree? You can agree on disagreement? There's a lot of disagreement out there. But when we look at the world around us today, one of the things that most people can agree on is that something is wrong. Something is wrong. Deep down inside, you and I know intuitively that things are not the way that they should be. Things are broken. We experience loss of a loved one, a cancer diagnosis, natural disasters, talk of imminent war and wars, the breakdown of relationships, high levels of anxiety and depression, and I could go on and on and on. You know, as followers of Jesus, we believe that part of the answer to the question of why is attached to the concept of sin. But it wasn't always this way. See, a long time ago, the world was a much better place, marked by things like peace and harmony, the way that God originally designed it to be. And sin is what led to all of the brokenness that we see and experience in our world. And now sin is a big concept, far bigger than we have time this morning to unpack. But I want to just say that sin is not just some abstract idea. Sin is directly connected to you and me. It's connected to our lives, our actions. Many of us, all of us in this space today, have missed the mark at times. And so sin is both doing what you shouldn't do and not doing what you should do. Sin is something that we do. It is something that is done to us, and it is something that happens all around us. And sin messes things up, and it has since the dawn of time. One of the results of sin is emotional pain. Emotional pain. And you know, over time, pain like this can accumulate in our soul. It can accumulate in our bodies. Think about the role that pain plays in the body. You know, when you get hurt, pain is your body's way of getting your attention, letting you know that there is a part of you that is in need of healing. And emotional pain is very similar. It's often a signal from our soul that some aspect of our person is in need of attention, it's in need of healing, it's in need of love. You know, when pain and suffering come knocking on our door, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, what do we do? Because the idea here is that not if it comes knocking on our door, but when. When it comes knocking on our door, what is our response to be? You know, largely, our modern world does not know how to deal with pain. They don't. Let me explain what I mean. Often there are three very popular responses to emotional pain that the world sort of subscribes to, and none of them end up working. The first one is this: we can deny our pain. We can be very good at denying that we even have pain. Unfortunately, this is even a popular way for Christian circles to deal with their pain, to deny it. And why do we do this? I mean, well, there are some good reasons why we do this. It's very easy for us to, if we deny it as a short-term fix, just escape the idea of pain. Pain hurts. We don't want to feel pain. You know, it's easy for us in Christian circles to over-spiritualize our denial of emotional pain and equate that to faith in God. Growing up, I remember almost being afraid of the idea of therapy or Christian counseling because there was a certain taboo around it. Okay? Like if you needed to go and get help, Christian counseling, that maybe there was something just really wrong with you. And it was almost like shameful in a way. There was shame attached to this idea of needing to talk to somebody in a professional way. And so you wanted to avoid it. You wanted to, even there were a couple moments in my life, young adolescence, where that idea was brought up to me, and I just remember rejecting it so fast, so quickly. Like, no, I don't need that. In retrospect, I probably did. The psychologist John Wellwood calls this spiritual bypassing, which he defined as a tendency to use spiritual ideas and practices to sidestep or avoid facing unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, and unfinished developmental tasks. At best, denial is a futile attempt to take the Christian theology of hope, which we actually sung about this morning, right? Lift up your eyes. There's hope on the horizon. That's the Christian story. That's the story that we get to live into and believe as followers of Jesus. That is our glorious hope, as it were. But here's what we can do with that. We can skip over our pain in pursuit of the Western narrative of the good life. We can deny our pain and just act like everything's great. It's all good. Life is good. We're all good. Denial is powerful. It's a powerful thing. It's also dangerous because, although effective as a short-term strategy for coping with our pain, its long-term effects can be disastrous. Think of physical pain again. If you get hurt and it's not dangerous, your body will likely end up healing, right? But if you have pain in your body that won't go away, it is highly likely that something is seriously wrong and it needs attention. And what happens is, if you continue to ignore it or pretend it's not real, what can happen? Well, it could grow. That pain could grow. It could spread. And it could damage you. It could even kill you long term. And so we deny our pain as a mechanism. The second thing that we do oftentimes is we detach from our pain. You emotionally begin to disconnect from your feelings. Certain personality types seem to have the ability to cut off their emotional pain. But here's the thing. If we cut off our emotional pain, what happens is we can inadvertently cut ourselves off from the entire spectrum of emotion, both high and low. So we want to avoid the idea of detaching. We might not feel sadness, but neither do we feel joy or wonder or gratitude. This is what happens in response. We take the whole enchilada with us, right? We can detach ourselves from our emotions, both good and bad. And then finally, a third popular way that our current cultural narrative tells us to escape our pain is that we can drug our pain. So we can deny our pain, we can detach ourselves from pain, but we can also drug our pain. One of the most common responses to pain in our society is to drug it. Many people literally drug their pain with alcohol or cannabis, pain meds, but most of us mask our pain more figuratively with our cultural narcotic of choice. Work, career, sex, romance, social media, entertainment, TV, video games, you name it. It could be anything that helps us distract from our pain rather than create a pathway through our pain to God. And when we turn to literal or figurative drugs, we feel a momentary relief from our pain, but ultimately we make our anxiety and our sadness worse, not better. You know, all three of these responses, to deny, detach, or to drug, really fall short of the Jesus way for dealing with our emotional pain. And I want to go on to kind of describe that this morning a little bit. See, the Jesus way is to meet God in our pain. The Jesus way is to meet God in our pain. Look with me again for a second at our passage today, Matthew chapter 26. If you have a Bible, I would encourage you to go there. We'll also have it up on the screen. I'm just going to read it again real quick. Then Jesus went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." And taking with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, "My soul is very sorrowful, even to death. Remain here and watch with me." And going a little farther, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." This is a famous scene and arguably the most painful moment in Jesus' entire life. It takes place the night before he goes to the cross, when he's feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He is feeling the weight of what is to come. And what would be coming for him? Well, Judas's betrayal. Oftentimes, Judas gets pitted as this terrible, evil guy, but you got to remember, Judas traveled with Jesus for 3 straight years. He was one of his closest people. And yet, we see that part of the story is that Judas betrayed Jesus, one of his best friends. He had the denial of his other close friends. His disciples abandoned him at his darkest hour. His coming rejection, his humiliation, his torture, and a brutal death on a cross, which was one of the most brutal ways for someone to die in the Roman world. When it comes to his pain, what do we see Jesus do? What do we see Jesus do here? Does he deny it? It's okay. You know, God has a plan. And you know, other people have it way worse than I do. Does Jesus detach from his pain? Well, it is what it is. Does he drug his pain? Hey guys, you know what? Let's just go out. That's one last night of the town. Let's do it. No. We see Jesus going to a quiet place with his friends to meet God in and through his pain. Notice the line in our passage today that he began to be sorrowful and troubled. He began to be sorrowful and troubled. Jesus intentionally makes space for all of his feelings of sadness to come up, and he meets God in his pain by offering his feelings up to God in and through prayer. This practice, what has become to be called by the church of old lament, is actually a key feature of what author and pastor Pete Scazzaro calls emotionally healthy spirituality. Many of you know over this past summer I took my first sabbatical. I was definitely overdue. After 20 years of pastoral ministry, I was ready to take a deep breath and find some soul rest, as we've been talking about. And over this past summer, I made my way through one of Pete Scazzero's books called The Emotionally Healthy Leader. I remember when this book came out, I was a freshman in college. It was required reading. And I wish I had paid attention back then. I really do. I wish I had paid attention a little bit more to this idea of becoming an emotionally healthy leader. As I said, this was required reading for me in college. And over this past summer, I was able to go back and reread. And man, it is amazing when you pick up a resource 20 years later and you read with 20-year-older eyes and experiences and pain and suffering that you have experienced. One of the things he says in the book that struck me so quickly was, he says this: it is impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. Wow. It is impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. Now, just to be clear here, emotional health does not mean being happy all the time. Please do not hear that today. Emotional health, and we talk about emotional health and becoming emotionally healthy people, as Jesus was, does not mean that you have it all together and that you should just be happy. Jesus was the most emotionally healthy person that ever existed, and yet in Luke's account of our passage today, it reads that Jesus actually began to sweat blood. An actual medical condition called hematohydrosis, which is brought on by extreme levels of stress. I checked it out this week. You can go check it out. Just type that in. Hematohydrosis, brought on by extreme levels of stress. I would say Jesus was stressed in the garden. Pretty stressed. Part of being emotionally healthy means two things: that you were aware of your feelings, that you know that you have this capacity to notice and even to name what's going on inside of you. And two, that you are not run by your feelings. So you are able to notice your feelings, but you are not run by your feelings. You have the capacity to sit with your feelings and let yourself process them before God in prayer and with others, causing you to behave in ways that are loving and not destructive. Psychologists call this emotional regulation, and the New Testament calls this self-control. And so to become emotionally healthy, we have to go on, as some call it, an inner journey to meet God in our pain. And I think that's what we see Jesus doing. I think this is what he's offering for you and I today, is that we learn how to become shaped into the image of Jesus. We all have pain, including Jesus, and what does Jesus show us to do with that pain? He meets God the Father through it. He doesn't sidestep it. He doesn't try to go around it. He doesn't deny it or detach from it. He goes through it, but he goes through it very deliberately and specifically. Some of the heaviest emotional pain that I've ever experienced was in ministry. Just about 7 or 8 years ago, in our first church planning experience, my wife and I suddenly found ourselves in one of the hardest emotionally healthy, painful situations that we've ever been in. We had experienced the devastation of someone else's sin. They were very close, like brother level. And this feeling of loss, I'll never forget it. It has shaped who I am. This feeling of loss, this deep sadness, this deep sense of betrayal were, for my wife and I and for our family and for those on our team, this was like a daily reality. Like we were just living in this daily hell on earth. And it was so bad at times, and the ripple effects of which are still felt to this day. Sin can cause so much damage in people's lives, in other people's lives. You and I can sin, and we can be sinned against. And it just, as I said, creates absolute mess and chaos. And you probably have heard this saying before, that time heals all wounds, but I think that's a lie. I think that time heals all treated wounds. Time heals all treated wounds. It may be true of small wounds, small cuts, small bruises, but for the bigger stuff, time does not heal all wounds. With the bigger things, time heals treated wounds. And what can happen if you let bigger wounds continue to fester? What can happen? Infection, right? It can fester, it can spread. If we hadn't pursued, my wife and I, emotional health and healing, and one of the things that we did, I'll never forget, we literally found childcare for our children. It was like a miracle from the Lord that both of our families stepped in to help us with this. But Danielle and I went away for 13 days to a place where we could find respite for our souls, emotional healing for our hearts that were shattered. If we had not pursued emotional healing, if we had not had great leaders come alongside of us and help us through this horrendous time in our lives, I think that things would look much different than they are right now. Some of you have heard me share this before, but I was at a place where I was literally considering getting out of ministry as a vocation. I feel like, God had called me to be in pastoral ministry, but I was at a place so low of just devastation, betrayal, sadness, that I was considering just like stepping away from all of it and just saying, you know what? You just go through all the things. Like pastors and leaders, they understand, I don't get paid enough for this. I'm a person like everybody else. It's hard to lead people when you need to be led by someone. If we had not pursued and chosen emotional health by God's grace, and that was such a process, it still is, that I'm sure that we would not be here today. I'm sure that River Valley Church, it would look much different. I believe God has a plan, and He has a plan to see people come to know Him, and He is using, both our Ascending Church, Elm City Church, and River Valley Church as a church plant, and all the other Bible-believing teaching churches in our area to reach people who are far from Him. But I believe it could have looked much different for our story had we not pursued this idea of emotional health. And so I'm passionate about this, and I believe Jesus is too. He wants to see you and us become a people who are emotionally mature so that we can continue to become shaped and formed by Him, that we can mature spiritually as He calls us to do. Here's what I know. If I know anything, pain is inevitable. Pain is going to happen. Jesus said in John 16:33, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. Jesus said this. You will have trouble. You can count on it. You can take it to the bank. You will find trouble. Trouble will find you. There's no version of your life where you do not get to feel the effect of no emotional pain. The Jesus we are looking to follow was abandoned, betrayed, falsely accused, physically beaten, mocked, and murdered. We do not get to choose a life that is void of pain. The prophet Isaiah called him, Jesus, a man of suffering and familiar with pain, Isaiah 53. Jesus is familiar, and He promises that in this world we will have trouble. But there are two things that I think we can do, that we can apply to our situations of pain. Two things that we've learned that I just want to share, and it's not like rocket science, but it are things that we can do and we can lean into as an application for how we can deal with our pain. The first is that we have to learn how to pray our pain to God. You know, God showed me that this was an area that I was lacking in when I was going through a really tough season. It's like, you pray, but do you know how to regularly pray your pain to me rather than just talking about your pain all the time to people? Do you know how to bring this to me? And this is a slow and painful process, I can tell you. But as we begin to name and to speak our pain to God, He meets us in it. He promises to meet us in it. Aside from Jesus himself, one of the clearest examples we have of this idea of praying our pain to God is through the psalmist David. He writes in Psalm 13:1, he says, "How long, O Lord, ? Will you forget me forever? ? How long will you hide your face from me? ? Just a little bit down the way in Psalm chapter 22, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Sound familiar? "Why are you so far from saving me from the words of my groaning? My God, I cry by day, but you do not answer. And by night, I find no rest." Here's an example of somebody who is taking, it's all they've got. They're desperate. They are taking their pain to God, and this literally becomes the pages of Scripture, right? This is my favorite part. David is taking his doubt and his fear and his questions to the Lord. And he's praying his pain to God. And we eventually know that the psalmist, through a rocky road, he eventually finds peace. But this was his process, praying his pain to God. Number two, the second thing, is that we have to learn how to share our pain with others. We have to learn how to share our pain with others. One of the roles of the body of Christ is that we get to meet each other in our pain. We get to meet one another in our trials and tribulations. And I've said it a lot lately, but I want to say it again. You and I are a broken people. We are a broken people. There's no need to pretend like we have it all together. There's no need, because we are a broken people. But here's the thing. We can find trusted friends in the body of Christ, in the church, to both share our lives with, and including the harder parts of our story. And I would say that it behooves us to share this part of our life with other people, because this is how we become known and how we know others. Galatians chapter 6, verse 2 says, "Bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ." So my question this morning as we close here is, what's the risk of unresolved pain? We've talked about pain. We've talked about what Jesus did with his pain. We've talked about a few ways that we can approach our pain. But my question is, what is the risk to you and I of unresolved pain? What is the risk? Well, left unhealed, unresolved emotional pain of a lifetime will end up sabotaging our spiritual formation. It will. It will. If we allow hurt, anger, bitterness, and fear to fester in our souls, it will undermine our best intentions when it comes to being more like Jesus. Many of us want to become more like Jesus, and sometimes we don't understand why there's a block for us to get there or to take that next step. Maybe we feel stuck and we don't know what we're supposed to do next. I want to encourage you to visit your emotional pain, because it is in those places where Jesus wants to heal you. He wants to give you freedom. He wants to allow you to move forward so that you can become spiritually mature people. So that the block that maybe you're feeling is all of a sudden not there because you are working through and resolving your pain. You're working through your pain. Because of Jesus's, and this is the good news today, Jesus in John 16, he not only says you will have trouble in this world, but listen to the second part. "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble." Here it is. "But take heart." The good news. "But take heart, because I have overcome the world." I have overcome the world. Because of Jesus' incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, none of our pain and suffering is meaningless. as it is in a secular worldview. In the Christian story, death and all his friends have been overcome by Jesus. We specifically focus on this quite a bit when it comes to Easter and what that represents, that Jesus has overcome the grave. Death and all his friends have been defeated. This means that the very pain and suffering that can sabotage our spiritual formation can become the secret to our spiritual formation. This is the part that I didn't understand for a long time. The things and the trials and the tribulations that God brings our way end up being the way and the mechanism by which he actually makes you more like him. So it's not all for nothing. And Christ has the power to take any pain and suffering, no matter how awful it is, and to use it for his good. I could give umpteen stories in Scripture that talk about this. One that comes to my mind right away is Joseph. At the end of the story of Joseph, where his brothers had thrown him into a pit, sold him into slavery, he becomes the most powerful man in Egypt. And at the very end, he says what to his brothers that come up before him? It's this dramatic scene. And he says, you know what? You meant this for evil, but God meant this for good. Talk about taking some really bad news and making it good. Every single thing that happens in this earth because of sin and the brokenness of what we're left with, right? Which is brokenness and beauty and brokenness. Jesus can take to redeem. There is no wasted pain. James chapter 1 says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be," there it is, "mature and complete, not lacking in anything." Do you guys see it today? Do you see this? The pain that we might often want to deny, detach from, or even drug is the very mechanism by which you and I are being formed. And if we, like Jesus, will only meet God in our pain, he will meet us there too.